fire history, and I've also been a wildland firefighter. And today this class is going to go into a lot of the best practices that we recommend for homeowners and that you can share with your clients. I'm actually based here in Redmond, and my service area includes Central Oregon and South Central. And I'm very fortunate that I get to work with these amazing partners from Oregon State Fire Marshal and Oregon Forestry. And so I don't know if you want to say, Julianne, any more about the work that you do.
So I am still boots on the ground. I run an engine out of Prineville. I've been in fire for about 20 years on the ground as a service, hot shot crews, smoke jumper. So I have quite a bit of experience seeing what happens out on the ground. So last year I was firewise coordinator for Clipchamp. So I'm happy to be here and share some of my knowledge with you guys.
And good morning, I'm Heather Miller with the Oregon State Fire Marshal. My position is Fire Risk Reduction Specialist. So my work is around working with communities and the structural fire departments to help with getting everyone a little more adapted to wildfires. You know, it's not a matter of if, but when around here. And so how can we adjust with our communities to help people? So I cover Central Oregon, so Berkshire, Jefferson, and Wheeler counties. And so live in the area. Certainly experience what we all experience around here, and I come from the structural side of things and the structural fire and a little bit of a code background, but it's important to just say education. It's great. Work with these guys.
Yeah. So to start off, I would love for everyone to go around the room and introduce themselves, and we want to hear one thing that you really hope to learn out of this workshop. It's really important for us that we're gauging what sorts of topics that you'd like to learn. If there's something that we don't have in this presentation, we'll try to answer the questions. And then at the end, we come back to that list and see if we've answered, if we've followed up on all those topics. So how about we start on the side of the room? If you want to just introduce yourself.
I'm Audrey Cook. I'm with Windermere, Supporter Real Estate in Redmond. And I was hoping not to go first because I'm not sure what to say so I'll have that on to them.
Linda Abbas Real Estate here in Redmond. And just a refresh so I can help my clients.
I'm Steve Forster, Central Oregon Home Pros, powered by Keller Williams. One of the things that is most important is my daughter's house survived the Gates fires that came through one of 5 houses that survived. So the reality is I'm here on behalf of the clients, and I'm here because it's personal, and to go through that process and have a refugee for 6 weeks at my house in Redmond because she was displaced.
That's incredible. I mean, yeah, I imagine many of us have either indirect or direct experiences with wildfire. Feel free to share that as well. Great.
Hey, I'm Brandy Foster. I'm with Keller Williams. I see some Keller Williams folks in the event. My goals for the class are really what can we take back for our clients and our community? How do we get people to participate? And then number 2, we've been talking a lot about insurance. So we're running into folks who are having trouble getting insurance. So the underwriter's carrying the home until it goes to sell, and then we can't get anybody to cover it. And there's our unique properties. It's not a blanket statement, but what can we do about that? How can we get our client connected with someone that can help them get insurance?
Yeah, that's a very big topic, so we'll try to get into that a little bit. We don't have slides on it, but there's definitely discussion.
Brady Milliken with Keller Williams, Oregon. Randy and I were actually in the office talking about insurance issues yesterday, so it's definitely the reason why I'm here. And yeah, personally affected with fire, lost my house in California, campfire.
Oh,
So that's
our coworker, Melissa, who's not here today, she works at them. Yeah, however we to go.
Yeah, Erica Elmer, Keller Williams. You know, just I haven't ever done a class in this sense, but yeah, my mom lives in Umpqua, so she was part of the
was, but it was literally.
We had complex fires last year and then one.
Yeah, hers was, it was just up the road from her house this summer, so that. That part is, again, got a personal connection, but I also do a lot of real estate at Versada and Pronghorn. I know Versada's Firewise, and I don't know what Pronghorn's doing for that, but, anyways, that part is kind of gonna be. If we're touching on Firewise stuff, though, interesting to know for the resort stuff.
John Hershey, Windermere Real Estate, and just hoping to take something from my clients as well.
Okay, I'm Julie Knights, I'm with PPG. I guess just meeting you guys all and finding out like what tools you guys have for us and what tools you have to pass on. And finding out good defensible space and resistant plants, and if we do come across a place that has high fire, like what can we tell the homeowner or somebody buying it about maybe plans or programs to reduce. Yeah.
It's great. On that a little bit.
I'm Connie Hines, with Premier Property Group. And we live in Three Rivers Recreation Area. We're a Firewise community, we sell a lot of property over there. And we survived the Ireland fire, we survived a whole bunch of them, and there's a whole bunch of them, and every year there's something that will our area, and survived the conflagration one a couple years ago too, and had every county in the state come to our place, and it was really interesting to be there and watch. We did not evacuate when we were supposed to, but we felt it was okay. But anyway, I just kind of learning about what to tell clients about our fire community, because we do have frequent fires. We've had super awesome response from any fires that happen. We're personal friends with the fire chief there, and I mean, how could you not be? Anyway, it's really interesting to know, I guess, more about continuing Firewise programs for other communities, because that's a really big thing, and getting insurance as well. I'm hoping that will help the insurance for a lot of people, because we've had some quotes on insurance that have been enormous. I mean, like $30,000 a year for insurance for a house up there. Yeah, and so it's an issue. It's a really big issue, and somehow a lot of this migrated in some kind of maps that were created, and they're not supposed to be used in the fire community, but they got created, and now the insurance companies have latched onto them and say, well, we're not using those, but they really are. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it'd be interesting to hear more about that. So
We will definitely.
okay.
David LaPaz for the pros. I'm with them. I'm about the insurance, because I know of some clients that, yeah, not that high, but they're pretty close to, 10 grand in insurance. And I think the insurance are just latching out the map that you guys put out, and they're going, oh yeah, which is because of the fire. So I'm here to learn to see what we need to do to protect the client. How far do they have to be clear? What do they need to do? What's the next method so we can prevent the house going up in smoke? Because some of my clients go, I'm not paying 20 grand on insurance. I'll live it without insurance. And that's what it's coming to.
Big topic.
Yeah.
I'm Tana Hatton with Stellar Realty, and just looking for information to pass on to clients. And we housed some folks during that 2020, like down by
Peter Hatton, Stellar Realty in Bend, and I'm here to, as more as a refresher. I've had a class like this before a couple years ago, but it's always good to learn more and what new information has come out. And looking forward to it.
Excellent. I think that's everyone. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
I already did.
Okay. Yeah. I just, before going any further, I really want to say how thankful I am that you are here. I mean, I get continuing education credits and other reasons, but You are at the forefront. You're intersecting with audiences that we don't often get to. And you're being proactive and taking it upon yourself that you're gaining this information to share with those clients. So I just want to say thank you for that. And that's why we want to offer these, we've been offering these workshops. And that at the end, we'll also share with you a way that your clients can also attend a workshop as well, because we have some of them. I don't know if you want to address
Now or at the end?
the insurance thing. How we doing on this one? I mean, we got 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah. I think we can take 5 minutes. So do you want to start?
So I guess we start with the maps.
Yeah.
So what happened was, we had the major wildfires in 2020. Huge amount of loss in the state. And, we haven't had just loss here, there's been loss across the West in the last decade or more, just with severe wildfires. And so things have kind of been developing for a while. We can't just say it's just this one thing. It's a trend that's come about. So in 2021, the legislature passed Senate Bill 762, which was a wildfire omnibus bill. There's 11 different agencies involved in that bill and the responsibilities that go along. So part of that was to create a wildfire risk map that could help guide agencies to enforce codes to help protect those people. And so Oregon State University partnered with Department of Forestry to create what they call the wildfire risk map. And as you guys saw, that didn't go so well when it was introduced to the communities.
More on a communication level.
Yeah.
But they have a communication plan now. It's a different lab within OSU, and there's a ODS that's focused on that right now. Recreating the map, and it's now called a hazard map instead of a risk map, but yeah.
Yeah, and so now the ODF and OSU and Oregon State Fire Marshal, they're traveling around to different, the Association of County.
Oh, yeah, they're working with the county commissioners.
Yeah, and so they're traveling around to different regions in the state and introducing the map again, the revised one, and having discussions with them about what the local flavors are and accuracy and reviewing the map and getting feedback. And so the goal is that at some point the map will be released again. And when that comes about, anyone who is identified, any properties that are within the wildland urban interface, which we'll talk about, and considered in a high risk will be subject to code. And so the codes have been drafted. Nothing is enforced at this point. It'll be when the map is in effect, then those properties will be subjected to a home hardening standard for any new builds or models for like siding and roofing and that sort of thing. And then the other piece is that they will even retroactively, everybody will in those areas that be subjected to the defensible space code. And so the plan from our agency is that when that comes into effect, we have that draft code right now that you can see online. That will be something that will be enforced by local agencies or with our deputy state fire marshals. The goal is that the first number of years, it will just be an education. There's not going to be any sort of enforcement specifically involved with it. Our goal is to get everybody to be in compliance with the safety. That's really it. It's not to bring a hammer. And so we've got folks in my position all around the state that are working with just educating communities on what best practices are and what people can do because we're all at risk. And then when the code comes into effect, then the enforcement folks can go out, but it's an education. That's it.
There's, yeah, two things I wanted to add to that. I think a lot of people have didn't realize that that with those maps and with those identifying of locations of highest risk, that actually allows the people who live in those areas to tap into programs, incentives. Basically, it helps all the different agencies around the state to focus in on those areas, offering rebate programs, other things, grants. insurance. And so it's really actually supposed to be an advantage for the people who then, you know, maybe they didn't know they were in high risk before, and now they can learn that they are, and they can get resources in order to reduce their risk. What was the other thing that I wanted to add to that? Don't know how to
And so the other piece takes into the whole step of the insurance industry. And so there's been the timing, I have to say the timing has been poor. Because insurance agencies, they have their own, they tie into the core logics.
Yeah,
that a lot
so
of them subscribe to help them with their risk.
those are for-profit companies that use computer models across the country to develop a separate map that's looking at wildfire risk. So these insurance companies are not using the statewide map. They believe they have something better. I mean, we could argue about that, but they're using something completely separate. One of the companies is called CoreLogic. You can go on the website and see, they explain what variables go into their computer model that, you know, that is created that then the underwriters look at. But it still comes down to, and this is such a big topic and such a ever evolving topic that even just this week, we were all in a meeting listening to how underwriters are, don't have a ton of guidance on how to interpret these models. And we're looking at examples of homes that were tied. And we were shocked. We were like, oh, that's pretty subjective. So now we're in the process of thinking of, there are folks who are trying to come at this multiple ways. There's those who are involved in policy and trying to engage with insurance companies on the policy level. So that takes time. And then there's us, the educators, who are now thinking, well, do underwriters need CP credits? How do they get their information? They don't go through a fire behavior class. So we're now in the process of like, well, how do we engage with these underwriters so that they're not just like looking at a model, looking at a Google Maps satellite image and being like, no, or they're saying, you have to remove all of those trees, which is shocking. I think that can have a really negative impact. So just, that there's multiple angles where people are trying to come at this, but what it comes down to is that the insurance companies, they're businesses, and they are using a different product than the statewide map that you've heard about. That's coming from Oregon Department of Forestry. So, yeah.
The state agency that oversees the insurance industry in the state is the Division of Financial Aid. So we have a flyer for you guys that kind of put their angle on insurance and wildfire. They're the ones who mandate the rate setting and the policies and what is offered. And there's over 100 different insurance agencies in the country or in the state that are allowed to work in Oregon under what BFR has approved for them.
But I can't remember if you mentioned that the last legislative session, they put into effect a rule where the insurance companies are not allowed to use the statewide map. I think that's just an important thing to address. And there's also, if you find that any of your clients are being denied or the rates are increasing incredibly, they can contact the Division of Financial Regulation. They have an email address that's specific for these issues. And then their staff can investigate if it was inappropriate. So yeah, we should share that and
take that information on track.
On where
On the flyer that.
We do need a place to send our clients when they're getting denied.
Right.
And also something we talk about when we're listing a property, down south, still in Deschutes County, west side, so Sun River bordering Forest Service land. You couldn't find anybody to get to that would issue a policy on that
It's
property.
scary.
Couldn't find anyone.
at this point,
Yeah.
it's a growing problem, it's serious, and so that's why I say we're all scrambling to come at this from multiple different angles. The policy angle and now the education piece, like who's actually interacting with underwriters on this.
Just in place to send them. I have a two-part question about the timeline. Heather, you mentioned code enforcement and map. So once the maps like go, is the code and the map gonna be simultaneous? So you've got a real opportunity to enforce law through education first, but, right? Do you have a timeline when that's gonna
It's
start?
all dependent on when the map is released. That's what we want.
Okay, gotcha. And is there a metric or a threshold for releasing the map? Like when you feel like you've touched enough people or the feedback you're getting is what you're looking for? What, do you have a rough idea?
They don't have
Years?
They had a solid timeline before, it was rushed. Now they don't have a timeline, so I think they won't try to get it.
When they're ready.
But we do have, we have contacts who can answer those questions.
Who would that be?
I'll see if I can find an email.
Oh, I was just- Answer that one because.
Did you say Boone?
Yeah. His position is in policy.
You know,
Yeah, you're like.
So, the ground-
For that email address to, who you can send your clients to if they've been denied. We will make sure, if that's not in your handouts there, I'm gonna.
It takes you to the website, but I'll find it.
We, as part of these workshops, always have a follow-up email. And so our follow-up email has a link to a bunch of resources. We will make sure that email address is in that. Sorry,
No, I'm sorry. You said the draft code is available now to view. So
Yeah,
that,
so-
so it's draft, but the code is, it's set.
It's most likely, yeah.
So that'll-
That's not the last legislative session because they, it was with the initial map that you had no risk all the way to extreme risk. And there were 5 classifications, and the last legislative session, they actually rescinded 2 of the classifications. They said there can't be no risk.
They collapsed a couple.
Right, and so now it's 3, it's low, moderate, and high. And anyone that's high and in the mood.
And now I remember the thing that I forgot that I wanted to say earlier. Was that the codes that will be enforced are the minimum requirements. I mean, they're basically what we offer in this workshop is based on best practices. That actually it goes above and beyond what those minimum requirements are that are going to be enforced. So if you go by what we're walking through in this workshop, you will already be following what those codes will be requiring.
And if you're in a Firewise community following Firewise practices, you're already.
The same thing. They're actually, when we look at the codes, we're like, those aren't strong enough, but they had to find something that was going to work for across the state.
And something that's enforceable objectively.
Yes, yes. So
Understood.
that's hard to figure out. I get that. But we still want to, with these workshops, be able to tell, especially localized here for Central Oregon, what best practices are actually going to make a difference for, if wildfire does approach your clients' homes, your own homes, as opposed to if you did the minimum requirements. So I just wanted to express that if you go by what's in here, you'd be good even if you have those codes enforced in your area.
I'm assuming the codes are on the internet.
Yeah, so you
Like
can
your
look
website.
at probably Oregon Defensive Space Authority to go to. You can request an assessment, which is a consultation if you want. That would come from either your local fire agency or the state fire marshal. And then there's also information on there for the education information along with, I believe, if you can get to the code.
OregonDefensivleSpace.com.
Or,
Thank you.
How does this affect, say, the community of Sun River? Because my insurance agent just told me that their company is not insuring Sun River now at all. So if one house follows all the code and does everything, but the whole community is like banned from that insurance company to insure,
It's still up to the insurance.
It is.
Unfortunately, I mean, again, they're private business, they're trying to
Right.
protect their risk, it's just. The state offers a fair plan, but what I understand is it's not adequate, it's really protecting owners, especially for carrying. So, yeah, it's a challenge, and, you know, for those of you that came from California, you probably have felt some of this kind of rolling down there, and it's coming this way. Big time. You have something you would jump in on? No? Okay.
Well, I mean, I just, yeah, it's a frustrating topic. It's been frustrating for us too from the.
We live here, mine went up 30% this year, so, you know.
Yeah.
We all feel that same thing for sure.
Yeah, and so now we're just like, well, what can we do? And that's where it came up with like, who's teaching the underwriter? I mean, do any of you know, do the underwriters need credits?
They do, 100% they do, but are they getting them in
And
this
yeah.
specifically, you know?
I guess one of the things that we'll share is the meeting that we were at this week was Project Wildfire. So if you guys function in Deschutes County, then we want you to be aware of that group.
Yes.
They are a county sponsored wildfire prevention program basically. And so they've been around since after the skeleton fire in the mid-90s. And then had a couple of experiences with very large wildfires that impacted the communities, where there was a lot of homes.
Did this end up on your?
No.
I gave them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I got a stack of these and things and wants to learn more.
They're in alignment with the red handouts there. It's just produced locally. So anyway, they're a group that they have a monthly meeting on the third Tuesday of the month at 8 o'clock, where they bring in different folks to do an education session, and it's also a place just to discuss wildfire in the communities. It's a connection between HOAs and agencies, and you know, there's an insurer that's in the group. I think there's a realtor.
Yes, and
I was attending that for a while, yeah. I wasn't.
So this week was Andy Houston from Financial was talking about insurance and, you know, his perspective of what he's seeing.
and it was quite good because we had to cancel other parts of the agenda meeting.
Good topic.
These meetings, they, they record the meeting, so if you ever want to look at the video recording, you can check it out and you'll all see all of us gasping and having discussion.
I just want to add about the Project Wildfire website. If you're looking for a place to send your clients for information, if you can just take one thing away today, take that, because you can send your clients there and there's so much information in there, including the fireways, information on the fireways program for neighborhoods. That is it. That's my go-to to send that to my clients. They want to know about defensible phase and learn about fire history in Oregon. And it's beautifully done at a non-fire level, right? So people that don't speak fire language, it's great. It's really cool. So just wanted to share that nugget. I love that.
Good, yeah, you know, because we experience, like, when we do events and that sort of stuff, and we're talking to the public as they come to our table, is they're like, why are you talking defensible streets? You just moved away from that.
Welcome to Oregon.
So I recognize we took, we're 10 minutes behind our agenda, but this was very important about, and I think that was well worth it. So just know we're gonna ourselves play a little catch up. And especially if the clicker doesn't work anymore.
I think everyone's.
Oh no, I realize what it is. This happened yesterday, right?
Oh.
My computer
He wants to restart it now.
yeah. Yes, yeah, it works. So just to briefly go over what we'll learn about this workshop. I'm gonna go over the historical context of fire in Central Oregon. I think it's a really important background that helps to set the context for why we have the current conditions that we have today, and also leads really nicely into fire science, which then explains a lot of the best practices that we will be sharing. I'm also going to talk a little bit about wildland urban interface, in particular what that means for Central Oregon, and how those wildland urban interfaces disasters occur. Then Julie's gonna talk about fire science and behavior, and that informs, like I said, those best practices for defensible space, which Heather will be covering, as well as talking about structure ignition, basically the home material, building materials that can help harden your home against wildfire. And, oh yeah, but this is the, I always throw this in there because some folks ask us like, oh, is this a class on codes? It's not a class on codes, it's on best practices. Many of you probably recognize a lot of these different forest types that we have across Central Oregon. And imagine you're on Highway 20, you're at the summit, you're driving towards Bend and Redmond, and as you're going down in elevation, also there's going to be less precipitation. We are on what's called the rain shadow side of the Cascades. You know it's drier here. We all invest in chapstick. And so as you drive along that road, you see how the forest types change. You know, we have at different elevations, we got mixed conifer. Closer to here, we have a lot of juniper woodlands. We also pass through ponderosa pine habitat. And I bring that up because all of those different forest types have been adapted to different levels of fire for as long as they've been around, certainly before there was settlement here. And those different forest types, like I said, they were adapted to those different fire levels. For example, at higher elevation, higher precipitation, you'll see trees that are growing closer together. There are different types of trees that when they do burn, they don't burn as frequently, but when they do, they burn very hot, and most of them are killed. So if you think about at the summit, there's some evidence of older fires where you'll see lots of dead trees, but underneath a lot of that regrowth is coming back in. And that's actually a natural cycling of fire that occurs up there. Whereas if you think about ponderosa pine forests, they were adapted to frequent fires, so it says short fire interval. And those fires were low intensity. They used to just stay on the ground. The trees, especially the larger trees, would survive that fire. The fire was an important component to the ecology of those systems. It would trigger the trees to grow thicker bark so that they were even more resistant to fire. It helped to clear out the weakened and diseased trees, and there was less what we would call fuel, less of the vegetation that would then, if there was that buildup, then fire had an easier time spreading. It could get into the canopy of the trees. But really, with that frequent low intensity fire, it helped to maintain that same level of fire. For juniper woodlands, it's more mixed, and they at times would experience hotter fires. Does anyone know why juniper would experience hotter fires? Anyone know about how juniper they're like torches. They have these yes. So when they do burn, they burn really hot. They put out a lot of embers. But the difference here is that they would historically, and they are native to here, they would occur in more rocky areas. And so they were spread out further. And what happens when fire reaches an area with lots of rocks? You think it would burn? Yeah, it doesn't. So in those areas, fire typically would just put itself out, where it's in a different situation today. And so how do we know this? Well, a lot of researchers, I've done this work myself, I've looked at tree ring records. So each year, a tree puts on a new layer of growth. It keeps doing that every year. So if you think about a cross section of a tree, it shows all these different rings. And what's cool is the researchers can measure those rings and be able to compare that to a database and identify which year each ring came from. What's even cooler is that then they can see evidence of a fire that occurred in that tree ring record. you'll see like leftover scarring or char on those rings. And so these red arrows here are indicating this was cut from a tree stump off of the Cascade Lakes Highway. That there was a fire that occurred at all these different years. I mean, pretty incredible. We are going back to 1482. And this stump here had a record going all the way to 1776. And that there were pretty frequent fires that occurred. So how do you think we would know that this was actually low intensity fire? Any guesses?
It's still growing.
It kept growing, yes, that's right. So if it had been a high severity fire, the tree had died, then the record would stop. And so seeing that the tree was able to heal itself and keep growing, and then it reported another fire after that. So this is just the information that we go off of that helps us to know how frequent the fires used to be for those different forest types and what type of fire used to be there, like what intensity of fire. But unfortunately, today's fires look different than they did historically. And that's because over the past century, there have been campaigns to put out all wildfires. That's understandable because we thought, oh, well, this is a threat to our communities, to the trees that people, thought of them as resources for multiple purposes. And there's even this old fire where it would wildfires were associated with on a political level of reasons why we didn't want to put them out or why we didn't want them to burn and why we wanted to put them out. But unfortunately that led to changes to that natural system of that natural cycle of fire. And as a result, we have a lot of overgrowth of trees in many of these forest types. This is very different than on the west side of the Cascades. That's a whole other story because that is, more moisture, different types of trees that grow closer together. And so they had a different fire intensity and fire return interval, like how frequent those fires were. But for here, for Central Oregon, we, because of the fire suppression, we have increase in the density of these forests out there and a lot more of the undergrowth that has led to more intense wildfires that these trees can't survive.
Are you talking about the background of the slide?
Yeah,
Jeez.
I know, I can't remember which part of this one, actually, this one is from further east. I think more like in the blues. But this is, John F. Marshall has taken a ton of really photos that have compared historic photos and recent photos. And actually I'll show you some examples of those. Oh, and one thing I want to point out is another reason why we have a change in how fires used to be is since the removal of indigenous populations. Because those historic fire starts were from lightning and from cultural burning from those indigenous populations. And once those populations were removed or they were kept from practicing those traditions, that also affected how fire moved across the landscape here.
You mean made it more intense fire?
That they were not allowed to burn the way they used to before. So then there's a buildup of fuel.
Which results in
now when it does burn, it burns more intensely.
So they were virtually back burning before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which is really impressive. And
Yeah.
now there's a lot of folks who are trying to learn from those previous cultural practices. But even for them, it's a challenge because they're trying to tap into traditions that they haven't been able to practice for so many years. So in some places, they don't have the information anymore. So for the role of fire in dry forests, when you did have a frequent fire in some of those mixed copper and ponderosa pine forest types, and also in juniper woodlands as well, that it would help to maintain that open space. And without that frequent fire, that it was far more overgrown. So now imagine if fire came through an area that looked like this, what do you think? Would some of these trees survive? Yeah, and then what do you think about in that example there? Yeah. And then so not only the trees surviving, but also the stress on the trees themselves, and then how difficult it is to put out a wildfire if it's approaching a community and it looks like that. So here's some photo examples. So this is east of Prineville. This is pretty impressive to see in 1890 how much more open. This is would be juniper, and how the juniper has filled in. And juniper is now seen as an encroaching nuisance tree. It takes up a ton of water. And like I said, they were really hot, so now it's really hard to get in there and put out fire when it comes through somewhere like this, even though historically it was far more open and looked like that.
Is it true that the junipers have a hollow core and the amount of moisture that is coming and wicking up is causing an explosion? And that's, in other words, it becomes a bomb out there in the forest when it catches fire?
They don't have a hollow core, they have an extreme demand for water. So they have a different way of different life strategy where they, how nerdy do you want me to get?
I'm listening to here, that's why I was listening to some of the old individuals, and this is what they were telling.
Yeah, well,
And I questioned it, but it does have a lot of water uptake, and that's why you see the state getting involved in removing junipers from
yes,
plants.
yes. Well, what's interesting is one of the reasons why juniper is so good at what it does and how it's able to just keep expanding, even though we have such a dry landscape, is because they have this life strategy where they are taking in water and oxygen, or not oxygen, CO2, constantly, whereas the other types of trees close up what the plant structure, the tree structure that takes those resources in, because it's, you know, it's trade-offs, that's more energy if you have those structures open all the time. And so their demand for water and other resources is greater, but it's also allowing them to live in drier places. And unfortunately, then that means that if you have this beautiful ponderosa tree that you want it to stay healthy and you have a bunch of small juniper all around it, they're going to stress out that tree. So it's a reason why we're trying to get people to, doesn't mean that you have to kill all the juniper, but you want it to look like this as opposed to this. This is a serious problem, and they are out competing a lot of our other movements. So now here's an example more of a pine forest. And as you can see, it used to be more open, and over time, this is from the picture taken from the same location. Look at look at how filled in. I mean, you can hardly tell that it's from the same location. You can kind of see in the background, and just really impressive how much it has grown in. And fire is able to, now the fire's on the ground, it's able to get up into the tree a lot easier, up into the canopy. And once it gets into the canopy, it keeps spreading.
I also noticed in the 1989 picture, there's a different type of tree growing
Yeah.
there. If you go back to the older pictures, it's mainly ponderosa, but I also
Yes.
see that there's
Yes.
fern.
Most people don't point that out. That's really neat. Yeah, it has. And so we're trying to express to people that it's actually pretty important to, if they're not adapted to that site, they didn't used to be there, it shouldn't be there right now. It's a hard conversation. A lot of people.
I agree on the juniper thing. Okay, to remove, I have some acreage and then I'm removing them, but how are they gonna store the water? Because it used to be up the hill like this, and you got all these junipers, right? So I said, okay, fine, we'll cut them, I don't have no use for them. But then I was asking, can we replace them? And they said, well, no, because then the pine doesn't have no water. So how does that work? The other thing is, it's great that we clear all this and out there and outdoors, but then you're competing now with wildlife, because wildlife means what? Water is cover, And if you look in that picture, no wildlife is gonna be there. I'm a hunter, okay? I think what I have to clear in every canyon, I mean, I'm telling you. So guess what happened to the wildlife? They're gone.
So I'll start with that question. You're right, the problem is that the forests are looking more uniform like this. And we're not expecting for us to get out there, or whoever works on land management to get out there and make everything try to go back to looking like that. We know that that's not possible. But not only that, we're trying to recreate conditions. I was gonna say recreate historic conditions, that might not be completely possible. We're at the point now of trying to create conditions that will allow these forests to be resilient to what they're facing now and what they're expected to face in the future. So that means patchiness, that means a mosaic. So some areas that are identified as being top priority, maybe some of that treatment gets done, and some areas will still look like this. And then that actually creates a diversity of habitat for wildlife. So the deer can hide in this, but then, not too far next to it, they also have that open space.
Not what I have. They clear every canyon. I even volunteer, say,
But that's
let's take a drive. I took a drive, I said, I see these vehicles, they come in there, and I talked to Forest Service and Hefner. And I go, every canyon, you guys clear everything and then log it. I can see for miles.
Oh, you're saying that there's too much?
Too much taken out. There should be some source, like you said, lose some of it, so they can have the cover and someone, you can lock or
It
whatever.
depends, yeah, I
It's
mean.
just, and I agree on the fire, don't get me wrong, but I also disagree that you should just take the logs out of it and, now what?
Yeah, well, it's always gonna depend on whose land that is, who's
Right.
managing it, who's making those decisions. And all I know is that for a lot of the researchers, a lot of the biologists, a lot of the foresters here, that we are using best available science, which says that we should be creating a mosaic. That some areas are left in some areas, and honestly, there's so many acres of work to do that we wouldn't even be able to.
Oh, yeah,
do it
exactly.
like that.
There's a lot of stuff
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. And yeah. That's good. Did I answer that?
Yeah, you're good.
So
So what can we replant pines where we remove the juniper? If there's so much water.
Some of them-
Water.
Yeah, some of them at this point are not going to be able to survive.
The juniper's sucking all the water, but once we cut it, there should be some water, right?
It depends on where we are in that elevation map that Ariel showed in the beginning. Some of us are too low in that elevation water map of water. We're not gonna get enough rainfall.
But if I have 60 acres up here, way up there, 5,000 feet up, and it's nothing but juniper.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means it has to be some water, right?
Well, are you getting snowfall and rain up there?
No,
Are you participating with ODF?
I am. They are. If we have that much juniper in the second in the water, if I
And then you
plant,
remove them, can't you plant?
can't you plant trees or some kind of tree?
Everything I end up saying in these slides is simplified in order to try to focus in on one point. There are so many factors that come into play of why certain types of trees can grow in certain locations. There's soils, the soil nutrients, how rocky it is, the wind that's there, the temperature, many other variables that you could not fit on that graph that I showed earlier. It would be,
Crazy grass.
6D, I don't, 5D, I don't know. So it's, I would say we should, after this, connect you with an ODF forester who can take a look at your property.
They're really good. They're looking at
We
it.
should be able to tell you what you can plant there.
I know that's what I said. That's my argument.
But is he
So-
not telling you what you can plant
No,
there?
it's a cut the juniper and then we'll figure it out. Okay.
I'm gonna take over a couple slides and basically just drive home the point that we have a change in climate and that there's an increase in drought. And then that's also in addition stressing out and drying our forests, which then make them tinder dry if they're more readily available to ignite if a fire does come through. And then another thing to consider, you're probably wondering, what is this map with all these dots? You can see this is Lapine and some river over here. And the yellow dots are lightning starts and the red dots are human starts, and this is from 1992 to 2019. So here it is, I was just talking about the conditions that we're facing. And then add on to that, how many more people have moved to this region. So of course, we still have naturally a lot of fire that would start because of lightning. But think about now how much more fire we're experiencing because of people who are living here, recreating here. And so a lot of the people that we work with, partners we work with, try to talk about fire prevention. But it's really interesting to see where some of these areas are located, where there's a lot of human starts. Some of them are camping areas. So yeah, just that's another point in what the situation is like here. So just to wrap up the fire context, historic fires were low severity, patchy, they varied across the landscape. That fire suppression has eliminated those wildfires. And as a result, we have these densely grown forests, and these forests are more stressed and competing with each other for resources, for water. And that we have more likely the potential for these large extreme wildfires as a result of this. And that fire seasons are getting longer as well. So this is, I cover this topic and it ends up being like, oh gosh, this is depressing. But the point of this is then it leads into, well, what can we do? And that's where the discussion of wildland urban interface comes in. And so the wildland urban interface, often people will think that it refers to just a specific location on a map. For policy and code regulation reasons, it usually does just end up being kind of a border around a community where there's an interface with wildlands. But for Central Oregon, it's everywhere. We are all in the wildland urban interface. That's what we try to explain to everybody. Because the definition of wildland urban interface is any location where wildfire can spread from vegetation to structures. So if I show you this continuum of wildland to urban densities, most people think, oh, well, fire is really only going to be an issue for a house that's out in the wildlands or in a rural area. But by that definition, if it's where fire can spread from vegetation to a home, what about urban areas? That's also wildland urban interface. We're hearing more about urban wildfires.
I just have a question. So is it the same as forest urban interface? Is there a different definition?
We don't usually use the term forest.
It's in our documents.
Oh, interesting. I think maybe that's referring to the same thing. That sounds like where community would interface with forest. Yeah.
So probably not.
And it's probably similar. But I haven't heard anyone use that term, that phrase. So that's why we encourage, even in town, that consider yourself in the wildland urban interface. And so just this last point here really is, I want to stress, so many of us are thinking, well, the fire is going to come from the forest or from public land, and that's their problem. They have to put it out so it doesn't get to us. I want everyone to flip that thought and think of this. This is actually more of a structure ignition problem. We have too many homes that are vulnerable, that are burning, and that's why all the recommendations are, we all as individuals or all of your clients can start at their home to make a difference, to make sure that their house wouldn't catch fire in the first place. And then it wouldn't matter whether there's a fire approaching or not. Of course, there are always going to be the folks who are trying to hold it back, keep it back from wherever the fire is coming from. But we need all of us to take responsibility as well. That these best recommendations say to start at the home, what the building materials are, what the defensible space is like.
I want to share just really quickly, because I did lose my home to fire when we moved on June for you. And fortunately, we were very conscious of fire protection, right? So we had, cut our trees, trimmed our wild grass, all of that. So it was maintained to our home, but it was a very real, and I couldn't explain the fear of my neighbors losing their home too, because my house got on fire. So it's a real thing. It's horrible.
I'm sorry that you experienced that. hope then that others can pick up on the reality of it from you.
Yeah, it's a very real thing. I was more concerned about all my neighbors than I really was. I mean, we got our kids out and our animals out, and that really dropped in, and I mean, I can't express the feeling.
I mean, we get the question all the time of like, what about my neighbors? And it's like, first focus on what you can do at your home. Because there's a lot of examples out there of like a house like this. A fire came through and that home, because of the conditions around it, it was able to, it's still standing. Think about the fires on Maui. There's an example home of that survived. And it's not a miracle, like people call it a miracle home, but really there are reasons why it was able to withstand those conditions.
That himself is a miracle.
It is a miracle itself, but you're able to point to the things that are around it that actually very impressively, they did 6 months before the fire came through. And they actually put a lot of rock around that home in order to prevent termites. But meanwhile, those are the same practices that we recommend for keeping your fire from keeping your home from igniting in a wildfire. We're gonna go into fire science now. Julie's going to briefly give you a little background on some fire science and help to explain again recommendations.
So, fire science. This is probably something that you guys know in your heads, you just haven't related it to the fire environment. So, why do you think it's important for you guys to understand?
So many reasons.
It's gonna teach you a foundation for the recommendations and why they're effective. So starting here, you guys have probably seen something similar to this in your science classes in school. This is the combustion triangle graph. So you need all of these components to have fire, right? You've heard that before. One thing about it is you have to have it in the right amounts to keep that combustion going. Consider that for a minute. Have you guys seen this one before? So this one, this triangle are the components that affect fire behavior. So we have weather, like if you have wind, it's gonna create more oxygen. That's gonna make the fire bigger, more intense. Topography is how the fire moves across the landscape. And the wind can affect that also. So all these work together to influence how that fire is gonna move and how intense it's gonna be. One thing, fuel. Who can tell me what fuel is to a wildland fire?
Grass, trees,
Home.
sage, wood piles.
It can also burn anything that's combustible, tires, trash, mobile homes, all these things are also fuel in wildland. And then one interesting thing is that one of these components is on both triangles, right? Which one?
Fuel.
Fuel is the one that homeowners have the ability to change. It's hard to change the weather, we get what we get, right? Topography, it would take a lot of money to change the topography. But fuel, that's what firefighters change, and that's what homeowners can change. Some of this work, firefighters don't have time to do around people's homes before that flame hits. So if people can do it ahead of time, it will come. Also, this fire triangle, if you take one of these components away, what happens to your fire?
Goes out.
Goes out. So we can manipulate that. So we can help homeowners protect. Anybody remember the story? Right? So
I love that.
you know, it's also something we can use today. Even though these homes are all different. Not everybody has to live in a brick house. Some of the recommendations that are gonna come later are gonna be, that can still help protect some of these other homes. It just may be a little different than how much needs to be done on the brick home. But just remember, it's really important that people understand, they look at their homes as fuel. That's why I built this matchstick home. You need to help people to look at their homes as fuel, not as a home necessarily, but when you're talking about wildfire, you need to think of it as fuel.
We gonna write that one, Dan?
Steve, they might have a job for you. Fire.
Sorry.
So, we're gonna go over some more aspects of fuel to pay attention to around homes. One of them is that the less receptive fuel is to fire, the more heat it takes to ignite for fire burning. Does anybody understand what that means?
Like if wood is wet, it's not gonna be.
Exactly. So if people build their homes or have the landscaping that's less receptive to fire, then it's gonna take a lot more heat and a lot more time before anything starts on fire. So there are different decisions people can make that they can choose something that's more receptive or less receptive.
Can you give us an example of that, Julie?
Well,
You're gonna do it,
we'll
okay.
get that in.
More to come.
So another important thing about fire science is how heat goes through fuels. So it moves through fuels in 3 different ways. Convection is that hot air rising. Now we know about hot air that goes up, right? So with that, the heat rising, it pushes up into the air. It's those big, huge smoke cones that you see. That's hot air moving all that up. And what can get caught in those are embers and different things. So that's important. One way that heat can transfer is moving up. And also, what on houses, you have the roof coming down, and if you have something under the heat, that heat's gonna rise, right? So yeah, houses, that's important to understand. Also, conduction, that's how it moves through solid objects. So fire can move through roots under the ground as a conduction. It can also move from something outside the house inside the house because of conduction. It can move from something right up next to that and heat it enough to move and start that house fire. And then we have radiation. We've all, had our hands out around the wood stove and felt that radiation. But radiation goes out in all different directions. And then that's important for homes because closer they are, one house is gonna put out, if it catches on fire, it puts out a lot of radiation. We've all seen on the news where they catch on fire and then it catches them. So radiation is another way that fire can. And then we have different types of spread. So we talked about how it can conduct through solid surfaces. So we have ground fire. In the ground fire, we have logs and roofs and things that are buried in the ground that are flammable. And it gets less oxygen, so it moves very slowly. It's hard to see. And think about the bark mulch. That's a very good example of a ground fire. It just creeps through it and it's hard to recognize. There's not a lot of smoke coming out of it. Sometimes it can pop up later. I think you've had an experience with that. And then you have surface fire. This is where your fire is burning on the ground. You have your sticks and your logs and your pine needles and leaves and your old tires that you can clean up, things like that. So it's gonna burn. It's gonna put out more radiant heat. It's gonna be more noticeable and it's gonna move faster. And then as it moves through the grounds, it can be pushed up into the trees. Ladder fuels and foam ladder fuels make sense, common sense there. And then once it gets into the crowns, it gets even more intense. Those crown fires moving very, very hot. When we talked about convection, right? When it hits these trees and that heat is going up, that's you're gonna get much bigger convection columns. It's gonna fail punch way up into the atmosphere higher because it's hotter. And then it can carry those embers and transport them and hit the wind layers, and then it transports it further. It can drop them like 1 to 3 miles away from where you can get them. So there's your ground fires, your surface, and your. So fuel arrangement. You have horizontal continuity. That's, you know, your grasses, they're all lined up and they're ready to burn. But if we have a safety gap, it stops the fire, right? Just like dominoes. If you hit those, they're gonna stop. The fire's gonna stop when you hit that safety gap. But berries, things that don't burn, that's what you can use as safety gap for horizontal. And then you also have vertical continuity of fuel. So when they burn, they're gonna have flame lengths of up to about 3 times the height, depending on what they are and how much wind and what the conditions are. But we just kind of general estimate is 3 times the height. So if you can limb like your trees or remove fuels to keep that fire down low, then it's not gonna get into those crowns. And it's gonna be more of a problem when it gets into those crowns. If we can keep it on the ground, it's gonna be less. So, Brandy, fuel size and shape. Does water burn?
If there's a fuel source on top of it, then
On top of it, but does water burn?
No.
No. So that is a huge factor. These smaller fuels, they can absorb moisture quickly and they also let it go quickly. So they can, if it rains, they're gonna get wet quick. And when the sun comes out, they dry out quickly, right? Log homes. Do these dry out quickly? And so they're much slower letting water come, getting water and letting it go. So for an example, you know, the grass, you can light it, it's gonna burn quick. And then it's gonna go out because it's consumed all the fuel. This, if you took a match to it, it's probably not gonna light very easily. But once it does get going, it's gonna burn for a long time. So that's kind of, does that answer that question? Example. So the size of the fuels affect how easily it is. It's gonna ignite. So which one of these homes is more in danger? One from the big flames or the embers? Which one causes more homes to burn?
Embers.
Embers, correct. So the roots are much more susceptible because of the embers. They're flatter, they can catch it just like the snow, they catch a lot of the embers because of the shape of them. And also, when the fire burns, if you have a barrier like this, you're gonna stop that ground fire, but the embers are gonna blow right over it. So embers are big, they can get in little cracks where people can't see them. A lot of homes burn after the flame front passes by because these little embers get in those ground fires, they get in the bark mulch, they get in little cracks and crannies in your home. And firefighters have gone by and they come back and all of a sudden your house is on fire because they didn't notice it.
I've had that experience myself, yeah, days later of fire creeping around in the mulch from a fire that was elsewhere, it was an ember.
So some of the research that has been done was done by Dr. Jack Cohen. And to determine like at what distance should we recommend to people to build their structures from fuels. They went to Canada because this black spruce is pretty uniform. So they could do a lot of different plots and it would be a pretty uniform amount of fire. And also they're so tight together and the ladder wheels, it doesn't take a whole lot to get a fire going for them. So they built a bunch of walls out of plywood and they put them at 100 feet, 66 feet, and 33 feet from the flame fronts. These are also fire shelters. They did other experiments along with defensible space. to see, how far away the fire would affect things. They set up cameras and instruments to record temperatures and all that. And then they did it over and over to see what kind of effects it had. So this was the wall that was closest to the fire. Do you remember how far it was? 33 feet. So later on, Heather's gonna go over some of those defensible spaces. But this is one of the examples of how they got this information about defensible space. But you can see here, this one before and after, it's got some char on it, but it didn't burn down. And then anybody know why that arrow's pointing to under this?
It's the uptake draft,
Well,
it's events.
so is it burned on the wood right here? It's hard for you guys to see, but
Not very
it's not, because the eave actually protected the wood there. So when we talk about trees, some trees are gonna be more susceptible to fire and some are gonna be less. But,
So back up for a second, because
So-
back in the Gates fire, a lot of houses down in the city of Gates, Mill City were ignited as the embers came up into the attic space. And you're saying just the opposite a little bit from what my perception is, and that the eaves is stopping that, but if they're vented eaves, then that's a different game. Is that what
we're
you're
gonna
saying?
get to vents here.
Okay.
in a minute.
I think
All right.
the eaves are shading or protecting the wall from heat.
Okay,
But it's not the embers, are.
okay. Got it.
So, when you think about trees, some species of trees are more susceptible to fire than others, but some that are not susceptible, maybe they're close to the house and they can shade and catch embers to protect the houses. So there's this trade-off that you have to think about. Not all trees are bad, not all trees are good. You know, when you think some people are very attached to their trees, I worked with the arborists for a while, and they are very attached to their trees, so.
Did you have to peel them up when they were hugging it? So.
Although usually when they called us, they really wanted
Okay.
to put those trees, but being able to educate people about some of those things is helpful. So, we come down to, back to the different types of houses here, and you know, Firewise is trying to help people to protect their homes. They don't all have to be the brick houses. People have choices to make. They can make good, better, and best choices. And that's what people like, because not everybody wants to cut down all their trees. So, you know, and some people don't have the money to spend on certain things. So there's good, better, and best practices that we're gonna recommend here. And we're gonna give you some of the basics. One thing in the handout with the QR codes, there is a link to the new fire resistant trees. Yeah.
Alright, so we're gonna move into defensible space and hardening and the steps that we all can take to protect our home from wildfire. It's not a guarantee. We can't stop the wildfire from everything, but we can certainly take a lot of steps to get the best chance of survival. You know, we've seen a lot of situations in the last 2 years where that will get the fire. It's hard to stop. It's hard to stop it. It's hard to protect our home. But these are some things that we can do to help give it the best chance possible. So defensible space, based on Dr. Cohen's research, we break it down into zones to help protect our structure from catching on fire. So we have the immediate zone, which is the structure itself, and then the first 5 feet around it. And then we move out to the intermediate zone, which is 5 to 30 feet. So we got that 30-foot number that Dr. Cohen looked at, and then that 30 to 100 feet. I know not everybody has a lot that has 100 feet away from a structure. So we've got to have some balance in there with, maybe we need to work with our neighbors on having a shared defensible space to help protect our home. And then the other piece is if you live on a slope, thinking about the concepts of, how fire moves and the preheating that can happen on a slope. If you live on a slope, then it might not just be 100 feet, it might be 12%. So there's some caveats to things. And when we talk about structures, it may not just be our home, but any outbuildings that we want to protect as well. And if we have detached garages and structures that are close to the house, then we may want to make that included as part of our first immediate area. So we might want to draw that line around that, so we give our space. Different things to look at there. So in that first immediate zone, we want it to be ignition free, non-combustible. If it ever lands there, it just pisses out. No harm done. So a lot of times you'll see planting strips in this area. We want people to move away from that and using it for mulch and for plants. We want it to be rock or our pathways or things like that. We have a lot of nice decorative hardscapes that we can use in this area. We grow rocks really well in Central Oregon, so I bet you can find good spots. But we just want it to be an area that's not being touched on. It helps protect things. So you go to dirt if you need to. If you've got park that's right up against your house and it's going to take some budgeting to make it happen, just get a rake the bark mulch away from your house. It's a good start. A lot of times we want to try to retain the moisture in the ground though, so having some sort of rock layer on top will help retain that moisture, but then also do that protection.
It also still is beautiful.
Yeah,
Pretty.
yeah, you can still make it look really nice. If you have trees that are nearby your house, we really want you to have the branches so they're not overhanging the house or touching the house. You know, we don't want to wear spots in the roof or on the walls. With our lovely snow we keep getting, we don't want the branches touching the house with that. But like we talked about before, trees can provide shade, they can provide ember screening, but they really need to be healthy. And we just don't want it to cause more harm than good being near our house. The other thing is just that maintenance that goes along with having trees near a house and the tree litter that comes along with it, making sure. And maintenance is really kind of a theme with all of these recommendations. We encourage people to do, a regular walk around the house. Take a look at where debris is gathering because of like wind currents and things like that. That's also going to be with embers. So we want to make sure that we keep those areas clean. Take a rake, take a bag, collect that stuff, and just do it on a regular basis. And just go on patrol. Take that walk around, get some fresh air. Just take a look at what things are looking. We're really starting to get into that time of year where this is the first step in the spring. Other things to think about with that immediate zone, if you have an attached deck to your house, that's considered part of the structure. So start that 0 at the end of the deck and work 5 feet out from it. And then if you have furnishings on those decks, make sure that they're more resistant to fire. You have metal frame. If you have cushions on them, store those cushions away when you're not using them. And that way when you're not home, if an ember shower was to come in, then it wouldn't catch on fire because they are flammable. So put them in a storage box, put them in a garage, just have a routine that you bring them out when you want to use them, put them away. And if you have firewood, totally understand having it near the home this time of year. But as we're moving into spring, we want it to be at least 30 feet away from the house. It's a really solid fuel package. If you have embers get in that and get it on fire, that's a pretty intense fire that can be away. When we look at plants, there are plants that are more resistant to fire with a higher water content, and we have plants that are more plantable. We take a look at the inside of the juniper shrub. What do you see in here?
Dryness.
What's that?
Dryness.
Yeah, it's really dry, it's dead, and they have a lot of oils in them that are extremely flammable. If they catch on fire, I think this bush used to look like that bush. Caught on fire, totally consumed. High intense fire, and we don't want to see this type of things. Very popular, they're green, they're cheap, they don't use a lot of water, but they're a huge risk to our homes. So if you see them, plant them far away. Please, like far away. And it's not just birds, it's spruces, it's
Arborvitae.
Cypress, arborvitae, things of that nature. It's those evergreens that have a strong smell to them. If you open them up, you'll see the dead inside of them. We get those away from the house. A lot of our perennials are really good to have near to the home. Those are more resistant to fire. This is a basket of gold, which is a nice ground cover that grows well in this area. You can have a really nice looking yard that has fire resistant plants near to the home. And then we just, if you have flammable stuff, just have it part of it.
And this is what Julie was talking about, like, there's a postcard, it's similar to you're saying, that red QR code on the back, so you can get a PDF of the newly updated fire resistant plants for home landscapes that talks about different plants that you can use.
That publication is kind of northwest based, and so you have to sort of be aware of the growing zones that are for this area. But
Yeah, each plant will say underneath it, like, some more detail about some growing conditions it requires, but there's a lot of ornamentals in there, but it talks also about native plants as well, and also things to watch out for.
So when you think about fire resistant plants, are the ones with loose open branches to them, not a lot of dead material that gathers up in them. It's more higher water content to it. You know, they're real supple, easy to bend, that sort of thing. They don't have a lot of scent to them, and there's not a lot of resin or tap. Are highly flammable plants, a lot of dead in the middle of them, a lot of strong scent to them usually. Bark is more on that papery side, and so it kind of helps clue you in on which versus. So this is a video of those lovely junipers.
Wow.
And what
They're
happens
juniper
when they catch on
bushes?
fire. And so the intensity is just, it's phenomenal. We talked about the 300 heights. I think this is more. That volatility with the oils and stuff in them. But please don't have to. And they throw off a lot of them. So, in that second zone, the intermediate zone, going that 5 to 30 feet out, we wanna make things lean, clean, green. We can do, groupings of plantings. Green lawn is great in this area. Our goal is to slow the approach of the fire down. As it's coming closer, it gets to that 100 foot, it slows down. It gets to that 30 feet, it slows down even more. By the time it hits that 5 foot mark, we don't want to travel anymore. And so, we can have plants under trees, but we want to have that separation, the living there, and that higher water content in this area for sure.
I've been telling my wife that we need to live next to a golf course.
Right.
I think I can say.
100%.
Right?
So what else can we do, Heather, in that green space that's there, that's grass? If we don't want to put grass in, or we live in a place where the water flow isn't great, what else could we put in that space?
I've heard a lot about
Zen garden.
clovers and stuff, and
Zen garden.
Zen gardening,
Well,
yeah.
it's xeriscaping.
Xeriscaping, yeah.
If going to that plant guide, there are some ground covers that you use that are different that don't require the large amount of water that lawns create. We're trying to not advocate for big lawns. It's not, you don't want that. That's important for Central Oregon, but that there are some alternatives, different types of rock options.
Does it work the same?
Is it what?
Does it work the same? So if I filled that space with a lawn versus a xeriscape space with rock with a few plants in it, does it have the same effect in terms of reducing fire risk? That's what I was looking for.
Rocks
Thank
don't
you.
burn.
Rocks don't burn.
But I mean, there's maintenance requirements still, because I still need that leaf blower, because some leaves from somewhere else, from a tree nearby, will still accumulate in rocks.
You just leave it?
And managing for invasives like our.
Oh,
Right.
man.
Yeah.
I've got a few acres of cheatgrass and
We all do. So, also that 5 to 30 area, make sure we got our water fuels managed, and this home does a great job of having their fire away.
all their trees are limbed up.
Yeah, this is out off the lower bridge. They did a really good
Guys-
And then that extended zone, that 3200, our goal is reducing fire intensity, you can have trees. Clumping them together is great, but we want that mosaic, that lack of. We just wanna slow that fire down. You see a lot of native shrubbery and stuff in this area, again, we wanna manage the wildlife too, give a spot for our lovely quail to run through and stuff, but again, just make it attached. That's the goal. So any questions on the principal space practices? Pretty simple overall, right? It's just managing our landscape. It's thinking about wildfire.
If you do have trees, just make sure that there's that 3 foot or that 3 times space
3 times,
between
yeah,
it, sort of ladder fuel.
You look at, the shrubs underneath and you look at the tree. If you like the shrubs, look at the trees more. If you don't like the shrubs, get rid of the shrubs and put the trees lower to the ground. And there's certain trees like spruces and stuff that they have branches that go all the way to the ground, but take those up a ring or two.
So, question about removing trees that are maybe up against homes or something like that. I live in an HOA where you need to get an arc removed, you have to submit to the architectural review that you want to remove a tree. Or in Redmond, if you decide to remove more than a certain percentage of a tree, you have to get permission from the city because it's considered. It's not just normal trimming, you're doing a major renovation. Would someone like you or someone from your office be able to provide some support when we're arguing with the HOA or the city in order to remove those fuels away because we are trying to be.
You live in an area where there's old junipers next to the houses. Yeah.
Or just like
In a
a pine
subdivision.
tree or something that I wanna get that resident away from the house or something like that, but it's a tree and I'm gonna have to get permission and. Yeah,
There's a couple of different levels, this is where and, for communities that are looking at their HOA guidelines and stuff, we have seen that movement to firewise really make a difference, and they're making changes to their CCNR.
Yeah.
And their landscaping plans to embrace what those firewise practices, which is out at Rosada, they did that. They had a group of folks that, from some of the folks that moved from California, and they were just passionate about preserving their community. They learned about these practices, they went back, gathered the art, gathered the HOA, all talked it over, redid their CCNRs, created a list of acceptable plants to have in their landscaping, created a list of acceptable colors of mulches to have near the house and stuff, and it was amazing. And then they've had some great work days where they got dumpsters in, and they really put it to work. So it's totally possible to do. I think as agencies, we would be happy to support you if you like to move towards firewise, or we can come out with presentations for your HOA and start that conversation and really help you start to move in that direction. And then as far as the city goes, we'll talk to Tom.
Yeah.
He's the fire marshal. So.
Right, but I mean,
it's more code enforcement than fire marshal.
But he could have.
there are different documents that, you could cite in your application that we could, link you to. Maybe that would help.
But certainly, the agencies are here to support your efforts.
Yeah.
So, but that you need to have conversations with the cities about their tree codes, then.
Yeah, but in general, fire department does a lot of one-on-one assessment, like have firewise coordinator where they can work with an assessment, the good people who are going through an individual home. For example, the people we work with, they're more on a level, like walking through one neighborhood as opposed to going to an individual homes. Give you recommendations.
I think Julie on the QR code there's a one that goes to firewise. It's more about firewise. It's a great starting point because rallying community, talking about wildfire in the conversation and how to get to that higher place.
I want to speak about how lovely that Firewise program is. So that's why I met some of these lovely folks is through a Firewise event in our neighborhood. And it's kind of neat to have them come out, talk about the steps and then what typically happens in their experience. And it's a great resource to give to our clients and our neighbors and our family and our friends. And then you're inviting the expert to come in and say the things. It's a really beautifully done thing. It's really cool. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Really neat.
You know, and when you're moving towards becoming FireWise recognized, it's not a certification program, but a recognition program. It's recognition by the community that live in a fire-prone environment and want to do something to help mitigate that risk. It's also a recognition from a nationally recognized agency or group that says, hey, great job. You guys are doing something really good here. One of the things it'll do is open the door. We hear a lot of conversation about like, well, I live next to federal lands. I want something to happen with that. It's like, okay, well, if you start to do your part with working on your property, we can help engage those partners and say, hey, this community is working hard. They have millions of acres to manage, but maybe we can direct some of their work to be closer to you to help give that buffer. So there's just a lot of positives. And then we always hear about my neighbor. There's the other conversation to have when we have us come in and talk to the HOA as a group, then we can say, hey, let's just work together on this. And, you know, if we get 8 or more homes that want to engage in becoming FireWise, then people will start to see, well, hey, the property line looks pretty good. I want mine to look like that. And so there's kind of that, hopefully we can kind of rally people.
Back to it again. Don't worry about everybody else. Just worry about yourself first and it grows.
Right. Take care of yourself first, and then we can help facilitate the rest. So what we've learned in a lot of research, especially in the last decade or so, is that there are things that we can do to protect our home better, because we know that it's the embers that are the threat to our structures, not the wall flames. And so even if we have a house that's 50 years old, there are adaptations that we can make to that home today to help protect it from the wildfire. When you talk about materials that your house is made out of, you're using better choices if you're doing new model stuff, and just stuff that you can take to help. So, can you have some there? So there's a group, the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety. They do a lot of research on structural protection and a lot of different weather-related types of things, but they do some stuff specific to wildfire where they can generate ember showers and put it towards the structure and test what works, what doesn't, where are the vulnerabilities, what are the changes that we can make to help protect it. And so this guy has the coolest job. Yeah. That's okay. I can talk. And so they built a structure inside of a building and they're throwing embers at it. Half of the house is made of fire resistant types of materials and half the house is more vulnerable materials. And so they're throwing embers at it. So you can see there's rock mulch over here. There's like hardy plant siding on that side of the house. The other side has bark mulch and shake shingle siding. And you can see the difference of what happens. They've got some landscaping here, but it's outside that 5-foot area. But they both have wood decks right up against the house, and we'll see how the fire affects it. Because what catches on fire first?
The mulch,
Right?
fine
Because
fuel.
that finer fuel, that embers land in that, starts burning up the side of the building. You know, that deck had a little extra reinforcement in that they had some non-combustible foil tape to kind of fill those gaps, so where if embers are falling on those open areas of the deck, it wouldn't catch on fire. That deck caught on fire because of the mulch, and then it burned up into the doorway, and the fire impinged on the house. So even without having vegetation right here, just with the mulch in the deck, it still did a lot of damage to us. But you think about people that have vegetation under the windows, underneath the eaves of their house, that catches on fire, and that's just burning right into those openings and up and under the eaves to where it'll catch the rest of the house. Really encourage that 5-foot non-combustible, no vegetation. So I was doing a walk in a community where somebody had arborvitae right up against the house, but they had like a rock facade. And they're like, so I'm fine, right? But what did we learn about transfer of heat in those situations.
Yeah,
Now,
a little
our
bit.
red edge
Yeah.
on fire, is that rock gonna protect that structure? Because what's behind the rock?
It'll protect it for a minute or two, but not forever.
Yeah, so you have that non-combustible facade, but behind that facade is wood. So you get that transfer, that conduction, it can still catch on fire. We see that a lot of times with like flue fire situations where a chimney will catch on fire, that heat radiates through the brick, and if there's any combustible material touching that brick, that would catch on fire, get that charring, and then eventually. Lots of cool stuff to learn from these folks. So when we do assessments on homes, we always start at the top and we work our way down. And part of it is that, the roof is one of the most vulnerable parts of the structure because it's so large and all the embers are just landing on top of it as it's coming through. So if your roof is vulnerable at all, it's gonna catch on fire. If we've got tree litter and that sort of stuff laying on top of it, or we've got our beloved wood shingles that everybody used to be required to have, then those embers land on that and it's gonna catch on fire. But we can have roofs that are more resistant to those embers that we can have installed. A lot of them probably already exist today on our homes. Asphalt shingle roofs are considered less combustible. They have different ratings, A, B, or C. A is the best. That's our fire resistant roof. Usually that includes, like if you have asphalt shingles, then the underlayment as well is non-combustible, so it's a system. But the other asphalt shingles are rated at least class B, which is still pretty good. But if you have a metal roof, great. Clay tiles are great. Solar panels, what we're talking about there is like the Tesla tile roofs that they have now. And a question yesterday with the other class about, well, what if you just have solar panels? Well, it's like, sure, that's that first layer of protection, but what's underneath there? You have a lot of material that gathers under there. Combustible material for one, and then what's the condition of that roof? There can still be a vulnerability there. But yeah, I really want to encourage folks to move away from kitchens. Even with treatments, they have fire retardant type products that you can put on those, but if there's maintenance that goes along with that, and just really the overall vulnerability is just too high for that. But when we're looking at roofs, they have to be maintained. They certainly age over time, especially with our weather that we have here, or sunshine, or all of it, or hail, or snow. And so we want to make sure that it's in good condition. And then if we've got a non-combustible roof, you still have to maintain for any gaps that there are in it. So on a clay tile, you might have the spur blocking, or the ends of like a metal roof, you might see some openings near the eave. So we just want to make sure that those are plugged up so that debris can't gather inside, birds are nesting in there. And we want to look at all the little nooks and crannies and angles that we have. And just make sure that we don't have debris that's gathering in these areas. Again, no nesting, no areas where pine needles and things like that are starting to gather, getting moss, that kind of stuff. We want to make sure it's all nice and clear. So, as we move down thinking about how our houses are built, we've got the eaves and we've got the vents. So our houses need to breathe, right? And that air circulation is really important. But we know that vents are also a vulnerability where the embers can go inside. They go into the attic. What's in our attics?
Dry insulation,
Paper, storage, all that kind of stuff. So what they found with the research is that if you have smaller screening, you can prevent the embers from going in. We still have to balance for what the proper circulation, ventilation needs to be for that. But if you move to an even screen, it still allows for a lot of airflow, but it can prevent most of the embers. There's some recommendations that talk about 16th inch, it's pretty small. And so that's where you start looking at, well, it could start affecting the airflow, and then it's just really easy for it to get plugged up with cobwebs, leaves, and all the things.
Even with 8th inch, every spring, I go around with the shop vac, all my irrigation, my attic beds, and I just push it out. So there's always gonna be cobwebs. Really.
And then we've heard a lot of people say, well, I found where a critter had punched through that area, so just another reason to take a look at that. you know, and the older stuff, you know, the vents were screened really to prevent that rodent intrusion and stuff, and so there was 1/4 inch, that sort of thing, so really encourage folks to take a look and move to an 1/8 inch. You can go to the hardware store, get a roll of it, cut it to size, fit it over what you have existing. Use some construction glue or something like that to fit it. You've got $20 project, takes a weekend, super easy to do. So just thinking about where our vents are in our house, we've got our eaves, we've got our, up on top of the roof, you've got the vents that are up on the top, and the ridges and stuff. Those are usually screened pretty well. Those are usually the outflow, and so not so much of an issue, but we're looking at, you know, those areas where the air moves in as that air circulates through those incoming areas or the part that we really want to take a look at. So under our eaves, on our gables, those areas, down around the foundation as well, because we get combustible stuff underneath the house. They do make vents that are made for ember intrusion or preventing ember intrusion. They are a bit expensive. I've heard $70-$100 per vent to install those. They're very effective, but if they are activated by heat, they have some sort of material that'll block the airflow and block any embers from going in, but then you have to replace the vent. And so they're not cheap, very effective. But, you know, if you have folks that don't have that budgetary concern, then they can go that direction. But $20 for a roll, go do it yourself. Whatever works best for you. Siding is another thing we want to take a look at. Today it seems like the fiber cement board siding is very popular, and it's great because it's, you know, combustible, it's resistant to fire. So thumbs up for that one. If people have log homes, we know that the larger diameter is not as vulnerable to catching on fire, so that's a great one as long as it's maintained properly. Stucco or cement is great. The rock sods that lots of people have, those are great. But again, you just want to manage for any of that heat exposure going. Wood is, you know, it's what we still use a lot of. So we just really encourage people to make sure that it's in good condition, well painted, sealed over, so that embers, if they're hitting it, they don't have a spot to catch and settle into. And so that's just really important. Vinyl, we have found, melts and catches on fire pretty quickly. And so if you can move away from vinyl, that's really encouraged. Windows are another vulnerable area that we have in the house. If we can keep the fuel away from those windows, you see a lot of people have bushes planted underneath their windows, that sort of thing. Get that fuel away, then that helps with that protection. Hopefully not so many people have single pane windows anymore, because if that fails, you have an opening to your house. So double pane is better. Air is an insulator, and so that's also an extra bonus to it, is even if you have 2 panes, you have double protection, plus you have that air insulation in between. Tempered glass is best, and if people are building new homes with the hardening code in place, then they'll be required to have tempered glass on all the windows, including skylights. So that's kind of the best practice there. And just be aware of the framing, making sure it's in good condition. There are situations where embers were able to intrude enough and compromise that frame, the whole window. So just want to make sure that we're managing for that. Again, that comes back to that defensive space part of it. We've seen through a lot of research that the vulnerabilities extend beyond the house itself. If you have attached wood fences, that is a risk. We had a fire in Boulder a couple of years ago in December. You know, Boulder is usually a snowy place, but it was dry, high wind day, brush fire burned into town. And a lot of the debris was blowing through, gathering up against the fences. The embers landed in that debris, caught the fences on fire, and then lit straight to the fences. Once you get 1 or 2 houses on fire with that wind, it just really hard for the fire guys to catch it. But what we found, if you can do at least a 5-foot break adjacent to your house with like a metal gate or something like that, that can save people. It stops at that safety gap from that fire burning along that wood fence, stops it from getting to your house.
Do you foresee that becoming code?
Was that?
Do you foresee that becoming code?
It's not at this time. Although in California, they're moving towards that, yeah. The
And
IDHS is working directly with California on their code development.
Well, code development stuff that, we're seeing in density in building and houses getting tighter and tighter together, so those defensible spaces are not available.
Right,
Inside the city, so is there codes coming up to prevent that?
I don't know that they're.
Okay.
Unfortunately, code can also be a platform of compromise.
Oh,
You know, it's that
okay.
debate,
That's a good point,
You know,
yes.
and so you've got lots of lobbying going on from different aspects, and so it becomes the compromise amongst the group, and so it's not always the best.
Okay.
You know, but when you're building houses, yeah, right directly adjacent to each other like that, having,
A 5-foot space in
garden
between the
structures, you
water
know,
line, it's really tight.
firewalls, that sort of stuff, no openings between those two areas, you know, but things that could be looked at.
I think we're seeing plenty of that building code in Bend and Redmond right now, and those homes are really close together, right? They're, less than 5 feet apart. We're seeing no windows between them. And then we're seeing that fire structure, that extra layer of stuff between layers of siding. So we're already seeing that when they're super close together. And then
But what people do once they take ownership?
exactly,
They wanna make it what they want, right? What do we usually do between houses?
good point.
They wanna stick stuff in the middle to divide the line, this is my place, I'm gonna stick power divider in there and create my screen. And so that's always, gotta think about that next thing.
Graduating the code would help with that.
Yeah, yeah, they store stuff in there. Yeah. So it can be a challenge, but think about the wood treasure that we have, and there's opportunity to make a change or a little bit. You can have a nice looking metal gate, if you want the privacy screening to it. And, which also the privacy screening sort of thing, you can affix to that gate. You can make it look really nice. The firefighters are in the community and there's wood fences everywhere, they will open up the gates and probably there's. Decks are not terrible, but they need to be maintained. Keep the combustibility down on it, if there's any litter and stuff, just keep that clean, keep them sealed. If we have an opening down below the deck, screen it off to keep the combustible stuff from gathering up underneath there. And, just do a good job of maintaining it. We had a lot of questions about Trex decking and this sort of thing. It is a little more resistant to embers, but if it catches on fire, it's more plastic blend to it, and so you end up with a plastic fire that's very difficult. So there's some balances there, but if you can go through pavers, cement, that sort of thing, that's certainly. If you have elevated decks, just make sure that you're maintaining underneath.
I've never seen anything like that.
You're the only person I know. Yeah.
You live in a perfect world.
Joking, I'm being sarcastic. I feel like that's, I see that a lot. Anybody else?
But it's, people may barbecue under these. Need a balance for that. Got a nice flammable bush right here.
Next to a wood trellis.
Next to the trellis, that could burn up, and so there's just some balancing, some evaluation.
That's funny, but it's a dry spot to put all my firewood. Exactly what they say.
Yeah, exactly. In the winter time, great. Springtime, get it out. Yeah. So then it goes back to maintenance after that. Make sure you're cleaning your roof off, clean your gutters. If you have gutter guards, stuff can still get underneath there, so still take a look. A lot of gutter guards will also catch the pine needles, and the pine needles just stand up in it, so you just gotta make sure you're still cleaning those. So take a look at the siding, if there's cracks like that, that may be something that you can put some caulking in, but be aware of the type of siding that you have. Sometimes they're required to have gaps for expansion and contraction, and so you have to know your product as well. Things to be aware of. And so you may be thinking, oh my gosh, my budget's, I have no money to do this. We certainly don't want you to do it all at once. This is an overtime, let's plan, let's make changes little by little, let's start at the house and work away. These are weekend projects, sorts of things, just chip away. And so we think about what's most important, versus what the cost is. Kind of help give you some tools to prioritize and take a look at your budget and how you're gonna manage this. Maintenance, cheapest thing we can do, right? High priority, just do the walking, you can figure it out. Fence, pretty inexpensive to make those changes, high priority. Roof, high priority, but you may have to budget for it, okay. You know, and so just kind of work your way through on making those changes little by little, and you'll get there.
That's a great slide.
A good tool. So it just kind of helps you kind of figure it out. And then just a plug for our responders. You know, the likelihood of you having a responder come because of fire is lower than if you had a EMS call. And so our ambulances are just as big as our fire trucks, so this comes into play on both sorts of scenarios. So just want to make sure that our driveways are accessible for our big trucks to come in, turn around, and be able to help you out. If it's snowing and you have a medical event, you don't want them having to carry you down the driveway to get out. So, just pay attention to your clearances on the side and your vertical clearances, make sure their trucks can get in, get turned around. Make sure you got an address marker at the end of your driveway if you have a long one. All the fire departments here in Central Oregon have an address sign program, so you can get a hold of them, $20, $25, they'll come install a sign for you. Screen, metal, reflective, really great. If you live in town, just make sure you've got at least 4-inch letters that are contrasting to the color of your house, that we can read it from the road. Think about that 2 o'clock in the morning, firefighters sleep too, that they wake up and they're coming to your house, make sure that it's easy for them to see the address so they can find you quickly.
Sounds like glow in the dark numbers should be on the house.
What's that?
Glow in the dark numbers should be on the.
Right, yeah, you know, and a lot of times they'll have like an outside light cut over the lights, or over the address, which is great. Those brass numbers, get rid of them. These, they're awful, they're so hard to see at night. Make sure it's, you know, something that's, again, contrasting to the color of the house, so it helps. Yes.
That's a clue.
That's all I. Very normal.
This is fun. Alright, we're starting with your kitchen. Louis, do we all live in the Wildland Urban Interface? Yes, here in Central Oregon we do. Homes do that local ways, flames, heat, embers. What's the #1 way that they catch fire? Embers. So now we need to make sure we're trying to keep the embers out, the structure is resistant, well maintained. And we want to use those concepts of home ignition zones to know where and how to reduce the fuels, how to maintain them. And we didn't actually, in some of your handouts, there's ways you can share with your clients how they can sign up for emergency alerts. But that, as Heather was just saying, that we want to make sure that there's a safe way in and out, not only for you, but also for emergency vehicles. You know, we're just talking about, Heather was talking about how when we assess homes, we start at the top, looking at the roof, and we work our way down, looking to the foundation, and at all the different components, structural components that you can consider for home hardening. And then you work your way out, looking at, you know, the first home ignition zone, second, third, in terms of what could be done. I want to let you know that for your handout that everybody has, there's a list of great links. Oh, here it is also again, I can set up for emergency alerts. We were talking about Project Wildfire, there's a lot of really great links here. And please feel free to reach out to us for additional questions. And I also had mentioned, this is, you all have this, you don't need to write it down right now, it's in that slide handout. But this one I want to explain. This is a workshop intro form. So you can share this with clients and they can then sign up for workshops. We have about 5 workshops that we're planning all around Oregon this spring.
Got on the sheet.